Welcome to the Dystopian Renaissance. We cover spirituality, healing, consciousness, and truth. In this chaotic world we live in, it's important to get out of the matrix, and we'll do just that with biohacking, nutrition, spiritual awakenings, alternative healing, and freedom. This is the Dystopian Renaissance, and this is your host, Johnny Sage.
I was always kind of awake. I never understood why we only had two political parties. They were both terrible, and still are. Or why people would fight to the death over political candidates. They'd always end up screwing everyone over anyways once they got into office, no matter what party they were or what promises they made. I tried to fit in, but I wasn't permanently distracted by the endless entertainment we're constantly bombarded with. Out of all the people I was surrounded by, I was the only one who felt like this, except maybe my maternal grandmother, but she died when I was younger, so I couldn't get to know her as well as I wanted to. So I was ostracized, and I had this mindset when I was younger that I just had to sensitize myself enough to get through life, and then the reward would be like a nice painless death in my sleep or something like that. That all started to change in around 2004, I think it was. It was through Netflix, of all things, that I had my first awakening. This was back when the algorithm was accurate and would recommend stuff you'd actually be interested in watching. It recommended I read these Bill Hicks stand-up specials, and I was blown away. Finally, here was someone who thought like I did. Appeared his audience did too, because they were applauding and laughing with him. Not only did he think like I thought, but he was able to put into words and verbalize it. When you're younger and have these different feelings, you don't really know how to state them. But here was someone doing just that, which showed I could too, that it was possible. These feelings and thoughts could be expressed. Within 2 to 3 years, I checked out George Carlin's stand-up specials from his later career. I think he had that shifted his material between 1992 and 4. Thankfully, he had more material, so it really helped my education on that. In 2007, Netflix recommended I read this documentary called America, Freedom, and Fascism. This was back when they recommended truth documentaries before the censorship. I guess they figured if you were awake at that point, no one would care or listen to you because everyone was so isolated. In that regard, they were correct. But it was still a great documentary. It had a lot of good information. The biggest truth bomb was that the Federal Reserve is private. To me, I consider that the one domino which falls to get the rest to tumble over, or the one card you pull to get the whole house to come down. Because once you know that, you realize the whole system's screwed up and you start to question everything. If you look at it solely on the physical level, it's really the cause of most of today's problems. Shortly after that, I watched A Beautiful Truth, which talked about the Gerson method. It showed how bad amalgam fillings were and how beneficial coffee enemas could be. Max Gerson was really a fascinating person. He was healing all types of things. So I guess they tried to kill him, but he was able to heal himself from that. Then apparently they tried again and succeeded. But hearing about his life and accomplishments really inspired me to look more to health. Then I watched Food Matters, which showed how beneficial supplements were and raw and whole foods. It was these two documentaries that I really consider my awakening to nutrition. The following year, Food Inc. came out, which showed how bad our agricultural industry was, how cruel it was to the animals, and how bad the food coming from there was for us. I also started experimenting with different diets around this time. First, I cut out red meat, then became pescatarian, then vegetarian, then experimented with different diets since then. During this time period, I saw a couple truth documentaries. The first was Collapse, which was pretty much Michael Rupert talking the whole time, but he really held my attention. I don't know if I still agree with him on peak oil, but he was absolutely right about fiat currency and fractional reserve banking. I also appreciate his other speeches and presentations. He put a lot on the line. The second was The Great White Hope, which showed how bad our policy was during the US drug war. But for the most part, I was watching content on food, nutrition, and health here. I found spirituality by accident. I was solely based in the physical world, and it didn't appeal to me because I thought it was mostly religion. But then I found this book called The Tao of Pooh in 2011. Despite it being a very simple read, it was really profound. The philosophies in it made a lot of sense and really changed my line of thinking. Synchronistically, my best friend was getting into Buddhism. He was sending me these Dharma talks, lending me books, and taught me mindfulness meditation, which was my first foray into having a spiritual practice. But at that point, it was off and on. And it's crazy because I forget the exact time, even though it was one of my most pivotal moments. But around 2015, and I was late to the game on this, I saw Zeitgeist, and I was floored. It was eye-opening on multiple levels. It's one of those, if you're sensitive, you're going to be really depressed after watching it. But it has necessary information, so I recommend doing so if you haven't already. Shortly after that, I canceled my Netflix subscription and got into watching clips on YouTube. The following year, I was checking out more material Bill Hicks released I had seen yet, and also Patrice O'Neill's. I was already a fan of his. I knew him from his roasts and specials. I also had some comic friends who said he was a nice person in real life, but I didn't know he was a truther until then because I didn't have access to the Opie and Anthony show when it was on. I love how he would bring up the Federal Reserve at his underground stand-up shows and phrase in a way which made it accessible to his audience. Even if his friends were making fun of him, he wouldn't back down. He'd stand his ground and speak his truth. I already respected him, but this just increased it that much more. In 2017, I went deep down the rabbit hole with YouTube documentaries. In 2017 and 18, they didn't have that much censorship. I mean, there was some, but nothing like it is now. Unfortunately, most of those documentaries are gone now, but back then, they had some great material between those couple years, which I really took advantage of. Around that time, I was introduced to earlier episodes of Joe Rogan's podcast. I was also late to the game on this, but it came into my life when I needed it because I'd arguably started a healing journey of my own through the Alexander technique, which helps your breathing and posture. I heard him talk about flow pods, and I saw another YouTube video on it as well, so I did the sensory deprivation tanks, also acupuncture. Then some of his guests were talking about plant medicine, so I did research on them for a few months. At that point, I didn't have access to them. I wasn't in that scene, so I figured I'd have to go to Peru in a few years. But I did get introduced to Combo, and I tried that, which was completely transformational. I actually serve it myself now, and I hope to bring some other practitioners of it on in future episodes. After my first Cabo ceremony, someone there told me they were having an ayahuasca ceremony there in a couple weeks and asked if I wanted to go, and I did. At that point, what started as a physical and mental healing journey was quickly turning into a spiritual one as well. I got a great episode coming up for you next week. Please like, follow, and subscribe so you can be notified when it's released. I started Patreon. Any amount you could donate is greatly appreciated and helps keep the show going. Thank you for tuning in. Be seeing you.
You've been listening to the Dystopian Renaissance. Spirituality, healing, consciousness, truth. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show. And tell a friend or two. That would help also. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at the Dystopian Renaissance. And please find the website at www.thedystopianrenaissance.com.